Welcome back, my channel to continue. In today's video, we're going to discover why this new tech race will change everything you know about the global economy together. Investors are looking for the next big jackpot. It sounds like they're really focusing attention on quantum computing. Amazon jumping into the quantum computing race with its first chip. We're going to open a quantum research lab. Right now, there's a machine being built that could crack every password, break every bank account, and collapse the global financial system in seconds. It's not a weapon, it's not a virus, it's a quantum computer. And the race to build it is happening faster than most people realize. Here's what's at stake. The encryption that protects your money, your data, and every secure transaction on the planet relies on maths problems that would take computers billions of years to solve. But a fully functional quantum computer could solve them in minutes. We're talking about trillions of digital assets suddenly vulnerable, banking systems exposed, military secrets compromised, the entire backbone of the internet broken. And while that sounds like a nightmare, it's also the biggest economic opportunity of the century. Because whoever wins this race doesn't just protect themselves, they control the future of global commerce, national security, and technological power. In this video, we're going to show you what's at stake, who's racing to get there first, and why the outcome of this competition will determine the fate of the global economy. Quantum computing didn't appear because engineers were bored. It appeared because the way we compute has started to hit real limits. For decades, classical computers followed a simple rule. Everything was built on bits. A bit is either a 0 or a 1, off or on, no in between. This system worked incredibly well. It powered the internet, modern finance, satellites, smartphones, and global trade itself. But it also has a ceiling. Quantum computing starts from a different assumption. Instead of bits, it uses qubits. And qubits don't behave like normal switches. A qubit can exist as a 0, a 1, or both at the same time. This property is called superposition. A useful way to think about it is as a spinning coin. While it's spinning, it's not heads or tails, it's both. Only when you stop it do you get a final result. Quantum computers operate in that spinning state. Qubits can also be entangled, meaning two qubits become linked, so the state of one depends on the other. Change one, and the other changes with it, even if they're physically separated. Then there's interference. Quantum systems behave like waves. Some possible outcomes reinforce each other, others cancel out. A quantum computer uses this behavior to push the system towards certain results and away from others. That's how it solves problems in a way classical computers can't easily replicate. This all sounds impressive, and it is. But here's where the biggest myth needs to die. Quantum computing does not mean faster computing across the board. In fact, for most things you do every day, quantum computers are worse. Sending emails, browsing the web, running spreadsheets, managing databases, processing payments. Classical computers handle these tasks far more efficiently. They're cheaper, stable, and extremely reliable. Quantum computers are not general-purpose machines. They are highly specialized tools. They only make sense for very narrow classes of problems, and even there, they're still experimental. Which brings us to the current reality. Today's quantum computers are fragile, extremely fragile. Right now, qubits make errors roughly every 1,000 operations. That's not a rounding error. For comparison, modern classical computers make mistakes so rarely that errors are measured over trillions of operations. One wrong interaction and the quantum state collapses. To prevent that, quantum systems often need to be cooled to temperatures just above absolute zero, colder than outer space. That means massive refrigeration systems, exotic materials, and enormous amounts of energy. And of course, these machines don't fit into offices, and they certainly don't replace computers running the global economy today. So it's important to frame this correctly. Quantum computers are not successors to classical computers. They are complements. They are precision instruments, not mass-market tools. You wouldn't use a microscope to drive a nail, and you wouldn't use a quantum computer to run payroll.
Simply different machines for different purposes. And yet, despite all these limitations, despite the cost, the fragility, And the fact that they're not truly useful yet, governments, corporations, and investors are already racing to build them. So you're wondering why such a big deal is being made about quantum computers in the future. If these barely generate revenue today, if they sit in labs instead of offices, and if most businesses can't actually use them yet, why is money flooding into this space? Publicly traded quantum stocks have already doubled, crashed, and rebounded on rumors alone. This isn't new. We've seen this movie before. In the 1950s and 60s, early semiconductor companies burned cash for years. Transistors were unreliable, expensive, and hard to scale. Most people couldn't imagine why they mattered. Yet governments and investors kept funding them long before personal computers or smartphones existed. The same thing happened with the internet. In the 1990s, massive amounts of capital went into fiber optic cables, servers, and networking hardware. Most of these companies lost money. Many went bankrupt, but the infrastructure stayed. And once it clicked, it reshaped commerce, media, and global trade almost overnight. That brings us to the key insight. Investors are not buying what quantum computers produce today. They are buying optionality. Optionality means exposure to a future that might radically change the rules. It's like owning land near a city that hasn't been built on yet. The land itself does nothing until suddenly it's everything. If quantum works at scale, the payoff is asymmetric. The upside is enormous. New materials, new medicines, new financial models, new security systems. The downside for early investors is limited to capital loss. In other words, they're placing a bet when the potential reward is global, but the risk is capped. Government understands this even more clearly. The US, the EU, and China are pouring public money into quantum research, not for profit next quarter, but for the capability over decades. This isn't about startups, it's about sovereignty. Whoever controls foundational computing power controls future industries. That's why this capital flood keeps growing even without utility today. Because once a technology reaches a certain threshold, entry becomes next to impossible for latecomers. Skills, patents, talents, and infrastructure lock in early. Miss that window and you don't catch up. You rent the future from someone else. And that's where the paradox sharpens. Finance normally hates uncertainty. Markets prefer cash flow, predictability, and measurable returns. They avoid long timelines. They avoid unclear outcomes unless the downside of being wrong is catastrophic. The story shifts here. Up to now, quantum computing sounded like a long-term opportunity, something exciting but distant. This is where the tone changes, because for finance and security, quantum is not just about upside, it's about exposure. And the phrase that keeps regulators awake is simple: harvest now, decrypt later. Here's what that means in plain terms. Today, sensitive data is encrypted and stored. Banks, governments, and corporations assume that encryption will protect them for years. But attackers already collect this data. They don't need to read it today. They only need to save it. The bet is simple: decrypt it later once computing power catches up. And unfortunately, this is not a theory. In surveys conducted across the financial sector, banks consistently say they expect sensitive data remain confidential for 10 to 20 years. Think about that. Contracts, trade secrets, customer identities, government bonds. These are long-life assets designed to remain secure over decades. When their confidentiality fails, the damage spreads faster than systems can respond. Central banks understand this better than anyone. Around 80% of financial institutions now monitor quantum developments primarily from a security angle. Not innovation, not speed, security. That tells you where the pressure really is. When central banks worry, markets eventually listen. This is why migration to post-quantum cryptography, or PQC, has already begun. PQC simply means new encryption methods designed to survive future computing power. Governments are standardizing them, banks are mapping where old encryption still lives inside their systems. This process takes years, not months. Infrastructure moves slowly, risks moves faster. The deeper issue here is trust. Finance had never been about money alone, but about the shared belief that the system works as promised, that balances are accurate, that transactions settle where they should, and that records remain intact over time.
Quantum computing puts pressure on that foundation, because in the digital world, encryption quietly supports every part of the system, from payments and identity to ownership itself. History offers a clear lesson. Financial instability rarely starts with empty vaults. It starts with uncertainty, with questions, with doubts spreading faster than facts. When people question whether systems can protect value, behavior changes, withdrawals accelerate. This is why quantum computing already matters long before it works at scale. If you want to understand why quantum computing could reshape the world economy, this is the moment where the picture sharpens. Up to now, we've talked about finance, security, and long-term risk. But the real economic engine behind this race sits in matter itself. At its core, the deepest impact of quantum computing lies in the understanding of how the physical world behaves at the smallest level. And that matters because almost everything we touch, build, ship, or consume depends on combining materials. In fact, around 96% of all manufactured goods rely on chemistry and material science in one way or another. Think about how many global industries rise or fall based on material limits. Energy storage depends on battery chemistry. Transportation depends on lightweight but strong alloys. Medicine depends on how molecules interact inside the human body. Agriculture depends on fertilizers that make food production efficient enough to feed billions. When materials improve, entire sectors move with them. This is where quantum computing fits naturally. At the smallest scale, materials follow quantum rules. Electrons interact in complex ways. Atoms bond, repel, and rearrange. Classical computers struggle here because they have to approximate reality. They stimulate these interactions by crunching massive amounts of data step by step. As systems grow more complex, the calculations required explode. Quantum systems approach the problem differently. Because they operate using the same underlying physics, they can model quantum behavior directly. It's less like guessing how matter behaves and more like letting the system evolve naturally. That's a critical advantage, and it comes with another benefit that often gets overlooked. Quantum simulations don't rely on loading enormous datasets just to begin. Now let's make this concrete. Better batteries mean longer-range electric vehicles and more stable power grids. Corrosion-resistant materials extend the lifespan of bridges, pipelines, and ships, cutting maintenance costs across entire economies. In drug discovery, accurately modeling molecules can shorten development cycles and reduce billions in wasted research. In fertilizers and energy systems, small efficiency gains scale into massive productivity boosts. In the early 20th century, plastics changed how goods were made. They were lighter, cheaper, and easier to mold. That unlocked mass production, lowered costs, and reshaped global supply chains. Entire industries formed around materials that didn't exist a generation earlier. The modern consumer economy followed. Quantum-enabled materials could play a similar role, not through a single breakthrough, but through thousands of incremental improvements that compound over time. Stronger materials reduce waste, better catalysts lower energy use, smarter molecules open paths that were previously too expensive or too slow to explore. And these are just the possibilities we see today. This is also why governments care so deeply. Materials define industrial strength. They influence who manufactures, who exports, and who controls critical inputs. When a country gains an edge in material science, that advantage flows into energy independence, military capability, healthcare outcomes, and trade balance. So when you zoom out, the prize becomes clear. Quantum computing isn't chasing abstract problems. It's trying to create the new building blocks of the real economy. And history shows that whoever masters those building blocks shapes everything built on top of them. If this were a normal technology story, the focus would be profits, market share, and quarterly earnings. But quantum computing doesn't follow that script. This race isn't about who sells the most products first. It's about who shapes the rules others will have to live with later. Countries view quantum capabilities as a form of strategic deterrence, similar to how nuclear technology or space programs were once treated. The goal is not to dominate markets overnight, but to make sure no rival gains a decisive edge that changes the balance of power. In geopolitics, staying close matters as much as getting ahead.
Quantum computing touches intelligence, communications, logistics, and defense planning. Even incremental advantages can compound over time. That's why policymakers talk about avoiding a strategic surprise, a moment when one country suddenly realizes it's far behind at a capability it can't quickly rebuild. History is full of those moments, and they rarely end well. This fear explains how the major players are positioning themselves. The United States treats quantum as a long-term national priority, funding research through defense agencies and national labs while coordinating closely with private firms. China integrates quantum development into state planning, tying it to industrial policy and security goals. The European Union focuses on coordination, talent retention, and shared infrastructure to avoid fragmentation. Different models, same concern, staying relevant in a future that's hard to predict. Corporations play a unique role here. Companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon operate globally, but their research often aligns closely with national interests. They provide the talent, infrastructure, and scale the government needs, while governments provide funding, regulation, and strategic direction. These firms sit in a gray zone between market actors and state partners, shaping outcomes that go far beyond consumer products. This creates a race that looks commercial on the surface, but geopolitical underneath. Stock prices move, announcements make headlines, yet the real scorecard measures something else: knowledge, patents, talent pipelines, and institutional memory. These are assets that don't show up neatly on balance sheets, but they determine who leads and who follows. The most important insight is simple. Falling behind in foundational technology leads to dependency. Countries that lack core capabilities end up importing them, along with constraints that come with them. They rely on others for tools, standards, and updates. Over time, that dependency shapes economic choices and political options. This is why the quantum race keeps accelerating, even when timelines stretch and outcomes remain uncertain. Governments are not betting on a single breakthrough. They're investing to avoid a future where critical capabilities sit outside their control. In that context, participation itself becomes a form of insurance. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Quantum computing sounds powerful, strategic, and inevitable, but at this point, it's important to slow the story down. All of this can be true and still not mean immediate change. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that a breakthrough on paper turns into impact overnight. To understand the timeline, you need one number. Experts estimate that useful large-scale quantum machines require about 1 million qubits working together reliably. That's the level where meaningful, consistent advantage starts to appear. Today, the most advanced systems operate in the double or low triple digits. Scaling from hundreds to 1 million is not like upgrading software. Each additional qubit introduces more instability, more noise, and more ways for errors to creep in. That brings us to the first major obstacle: error correction. In simple terms, quantum systems are extremely sensitive. Tiny disturbances can ruin calculations. Fixing that requires layers of redundancy, which dramatically increases complexity and cost. These machines demand extreme environments, specialized hardware, and highly controlled conditions. Building and maintaining them is expensive, and scaling makes that expense grow quickly. This isn't something that spreads organically through the market. It requires sustained investment over long periods, often without short-term payoff. Then there's the talent. Quantum computing sits at the interaction of physics, engineering, and software. People who truly understand all three are rare. Training them takes years. Teams don't form overnight, and competition for expertise is intense. Without skilled people, even the best hardware sits idle. Use cases are still developing as well. Researchers know where quantum computation might help, but turning that potential into reliable workflows takes experimentation. Many applications remain immature, not because they lack promise, but because the surrounding ecosystem isn't ready yet. Tools, standards, and best practices are still forming. Put all of this together and the timeline becomes clearer. Over the next 5 years, the impact will stay limited and likely out of headlines. Progress happens in labs, pilots, and narrow experiments. In 10 years, certain industries begin to see niche utility, focused on specific problems where quantum offers a clear edge. It will likely be many, many years before the effects become structural,
reshaping how materials, energy, and production systems are designed. Quantum computing would not flip the global economy tomorrow, but building its capabilities is incredibly important today. Technologies that move slowly often reshape the world most deeply because societies adapt around them without realizing it. We now understand what quantum computing can do, while capital and governments are racing toward it, and where its real impact will come from. The change won't arrive as a shock, it will arrive as a shift in how materials are made, energy is used, and how power is distributed. And when that moment comes, the groundwork will already be decades old. We've reached the end of today's topic. Wishing you a joyful day, and remember to subscribe to continue for more exciting videos. Thank you and goodbye.